this week, the fourth national assessment of climate change released by 13 agencies. Give us a sense of just basically what that is.
Sure. So this is a congressionally mandated report that is published every 4 years by this organization. It's a governmental body, the U.S. Global Change Research Group, which, as you allude to, consists of 13 different agencies, including NOAA, NASA, Department of Interior, et cetera, all of whom are involved in research that's relevant to our understanding of human-caused climate change. And so there's this congressionally mandated report every 4 years that describes as best we can, based on the best available science, our state of understanding of climate change and its impacts on the United States.
So how is this report different from, let's say, something like the IPCC report? What makes this report any different from others?
Yeah, so this report focuses specifically on the United States and on impacts, both the impacts that have been observed, that we are seeing now, and that we might expect in the future under different possible scenarios. Much more focused on the United States in particular than the reports of the IPCC, the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And I would say that this report is really focused more on connecting the dots, really explaining in a way that's accessible to the public what the impacts of climate change are and what they're likely to be in the future if we don't tackle this problem.
Okay, and I want to get into the what those dots are in a moment, because I think that is what is particularly unique about this this report is it really does show on a fairly granular level what the implications will be of, and what they are now, of climate change. But before we go any further, because, the coverage has been largely around this notion of 13 governmental agencies put this document or created this document. It's congressionally mandated. The executive branch has no option but to release it. They chose to release it on the day after Thanksgiving, which is a very slow news day, essentially, or at least people don't pay attention to the news on that day. And so the dynamic is between Donald Trump, who's basically said he read the report, it's fine, he doesn't believe it, and the report. But one of the things we keep hearing is that the reason why these people wrote the report is because they wouldn't make money talking about climate change. I'm sure you've heard this criticism, but give us a sense, these are people who are simply doing their jobs in these agencies and are simply talking about a factor that impacts what their job is.
No, absolutely. And in fact, this is a voluntary effort on their part. There are government scientists, but there are also many academic scientists who contribute to this report. And they're doing this on a voluntary basis. They're not getting paid for it. In the case of academic scientists at universities, or in positions where they have to raise grant money to support their salaries, in a sense, they're actually putting themselves at a disadvantage because they're spending all this time on this voluntary effort. It's a labor of love. It's communicating the science and its implications to the public, but that's time that they could be spending writing grant proposals and doing other things. And so, as is often the case, when an accusation like that is made by Trump or those who support his policies, those sorts of accusations are typically made in bad faith, and they reflect what we call projection, right? The reality is that those who are attacking the report, the scientists trying to undermine the public faith in science, are actually bolstered by tens of, if not hundreds of millions of fossil fuel industry dollars that are behind this very well-organized, very well-funded effort to discredit the science of human-caused climate change and thereby do the bidding of fossil fuel interests who don't want to see us move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy, what is necessary if we are going to prevent catastrophic climate change.
All right, before we get into the specifics of the the connecting the dots, what you called it. I mean, just give us a sense of contextualize this fourth national assessment of climate change with the other three. When were those released? I guess it's every 4 years. But give us a sense of when they came out and what's the what's the change in these reports?
Right. Well, under Republican administrations, under George H.W. Bush's administration, for example, there were similar efforts to try to, make sure that the report didn't get as much attention as it might otherwise. There were discussions, trying to prevent the release of the report, and ultimately that was deemed not lawful. It's congressionally mandated. It has to be released. Under the Obama administration, and so there was, I think, one 2014 report would have been released under the Obama administration. It was a sober assessment of the science of climate change. I'll tell you, here's the difference. It isn't so much the developments in the science, although there have been significant developments in the science. We're better able to connect the dots when it comes to the impact that climate change is having on extreme weather events, when it comes to the threat of global sea level rise, where just in a matter of a few years, the scientific community has literally had to double our estimate of how much sea level rise we could see by the end of the century. It's gone from about 3 feet to now we're seeing maybe 6 to 8 feet by the end of this century because we now using more elaborate models that are better able to represent the dynamic nature of ice sheets like the Antarctic and Greenland ice sheet. We now understand that those ice sheets, the dynamic nature of them allows them to collapse more quickly and contribute to sea level rise considerably more quickly than we thought they could just a matter of a few years ago. So the science, the developments in the science send a sober message about the threat of climate change. But there's something else that's happened. The extreme summer of 2018, the summer that we just went through, where there was an unprecedented spate of wildfires, heat waves, droughts, superstorms, floods that we know were exacerbated by climate change. The science tells us that. But more than that, people can see it with their own two eyes. People now see the impact of climate change playing out on their television screens, in their newspaper headlines, in their social media feeds. And I think that's the difference. People can now connect the scientific evidence with what they are seeing.
Interesting. And also that much more disturbing because as it becomes more obvious, the situation becomes more dire and our ability, the window for our society taking action, what we're watching is basically that window closed, aren't we?
We're seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? If the impacts of climate change have become so obvious that we can now see them play out in real time in terms of disastrous superstorms like Michael and Maria and Florence, unprecedented flooding events in Houston and North Carolina, and of course, California no longer even has a fire season. California is a fire season now. And that, again, what that tells us is we're much farther along than we should have ever allowed ourselves to get. Because if we're seeing that already, there's a more bit of climate change in the pipeline. If we're seeing that happen already, if the impacts are becoming so obvious to the person on the street, well, we've baked in at least another 0.5 degree Celsius, another degree Fahrenheit of warming, and things will get worse. The question is, how far down this dangerous highway are we willing to drive?
All right. We've got to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk more about this fourth national assessment of climate change, the dots that are being connected, and what in a better world we would have our government do about it. We got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder, Ring of Fire Radio.